All right, what's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be doing a very highly requested video. Going to be diving into pec training. We're going to learn how to build fully developed, thick, detailed chesticles. This is by far the most requested video I get, and I think that's because I've touched on this a lot in past videos, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. People are always writing me messages on Instagram and YouTube saying that they feel so much more activation in their pecs now that they do it the way that I recommend, with controlling your rib cage and more scapular depression. They talk about being able to really connect to them for the first time, getting sore, and also like not having shoulder issues or anything like that. And so since I've talked about it like a lot sporadically on different videos, I figured it'd be good to just have one big comprehensive video to refer to. And yeah, I mean, look at this. I mean, constantly I'm getting feedback from people about how happy they are to have learned how to press correctly. So this is something that pretty much every single influencer, good and bad, gets wrong. And it's because they're looking at the body through kind of a simplified lens. We're looking at it like 2D, usually as like a pulley and levers kind of thing, getting something from point A to point B. They're not taking into account how the structure influences everything, especially all the muscles that attach to the ribs, like your pecs. So why should you listen to me? Well, good thing about what we do in this industry is the proof is in the pudding, and I have got some pretty decent pecs, and I always have. That has always been my strongest body part because I always intuitively connected to it. I remember being very young, like 16, when I was really getting into working out like hardcore, and I remember doing presses and being like, okay, if I really like engage my core is what I thought of it at the time. I was like, if I really engage my core, I feel way more. I'm much weaker. Like I remember kids were pressing like more than me that were my age that weren't as developed, and it really bothered me. But I was like, if it feels so much harder, it's probably better. Now later in life, I've learned that my intuition was correct, and I kind of know the physiological reasoning behind what I was feeling. And like I said, this is something that pretty much everybody gets wrong. You know who doesn't get it wrong, though? A lot of times is bodybuilders. And yet people will critique them, saying that they should be using a bigger range of motion to get better gains. Well, I'm going to show you why a bigger range of motion for your chest is not going to equal more gains. In fact, it's going to equal less, and it's probably going to lead to shoulder dysfunction. So like I said, I got some tatas. And you're not going to be able to develop this kind of detail in your chest if you're compressed. So let's break out the good old rib cage. So if you really want to get good tension on your pecs, we need your rib cage to be nice and full. What happens is a lot of people think that there should be like puffing out their chest, for instance. If I puff out my chest, I'm just compressing through this back area. Like I'm pushing up through here. When you puff out your chest, all you're doing is compressing this posterior rib cage. You're not expanding anymore. What you need to really get a deep stretch and activation on the majority of your pec fibers is a volumized rib cage. So by extending the back to puff out your chest a little more, you're actually losing volume. So I've demonstrated this before, and I don't know if it helps anybody, but for whatever reason it makes sense to me. So let's use the old Coke bottle. All right, so Coke bottle is my rib cage. The label is everything that attaches to it. My pecs on one side, my lats on the other. I mean, those are really all we care about as bodybuilders, but you got your intercostals, your serratus, obliques, all that good stuff. So when this Coke bottle is fully volumized in a cylinder, it's taut all around it. There's a stretch occurring across the whole thing. Now, if I were to compress, which would be, like I showed you with the rib cage, if I were to try to arch to puff out that, I'm still losing volume. Then everything that attaches to the rib cage kind of loses that tautness, that stretch. Okay, so now I'm not getting a stretch action across the majority of the muscle fibers, maybe certain ones, but I'm losing a ton of activation. So compressed rib cage, losing stretch tension on the vast majority of the pecs, volumized rib cage, and then we've got that stretch occurring across the entire belly of the muscle. And this is something that me and Zach Couples talked about on our podcast. I've shared this clip before, but I think it's really helpful.
And this goes back to dead guy anatomy. When most people look at any type of lift, they look at one attachment and then they look at the other attachment, and they don't look at anything in between that could potentially influence contractility.
And that's what the biggest mistake is that everybody's making. Like I was saying, they're just thinking about how far is point A from point B, when the shape of your rib cage has a huge influence on what's happening to all the muscle fibers across it.
the dirty little secret is your muscles do not contract uniformly across the entire muscle. And that's an evidence-based statement. They've done studies where they've demonstrated that. And so let's think about that in the case of muscles that run along the rib cage. I think pecs are an easy example of this. Like if I do something that brings the chest forward, that might put a stretch locally on the pec here. And if I pull the shoulder down and back, that could affect the pec at the humeral attachment. But what about all this stuff here along the chest? How do I get that to expand, open up, and get on stretch?
It kind of got cut out, unfortunately. His audio went out a little bit, but what he says after that is you have to breathe. And that's the biggest thing. If this rib cage is compressed and you don't get expansion as you inhale, then volumize and stretch your pecs from the inside out. That's a huge stretch you're missing out on your pec. So all you evidence-based nerds that love the deep stretch, as soon as you arch and compress your ribcage, you're missing out on the vast majority if you don't volumize your ribcage and inhale as you lower.
So I think it's a thing that a lot of people gloss over because they're only looking at trying to pull two ends as opposed to trying to create an action across the whole muscle itself.
And Zach mentioned dead guy anatomy, and that's what he talked about. We're only looking at pulling something for two ends. That's a very limited view. Something I've been doing a really deep dive in, really last 4 or 5 months, is something called biotensegrity. I'm reading a couple really good books, and it is really enlightening to kind of get a different viewpoint on biomechanics and how integrated everything really is and how your shape influences everything. So eventually I would like to make a video really diving into it, but it's like some complex stuff, and I definitely don't feel confident enough right now to speak about it. And so when you keep your ribcage volumized and you don't go into this compensation pattern where you just orient your ribcage and compress everything, you actually don't need to get a huge range of motion. You can go a little bit past 90 and just try to keep your integrity of your stack and keep some intrathoracic pressure. A lot of people have like floating scapula because they're so compressed in that upper dorsal rostral area, the upper mid back. They're always squeezing and arching and everything, so they don't have the ability to create that space and actually depress all the way with any kind of load. And so you might see somebody who's like got this really loose scap and they're getting this huge range of motion. They're using one of those bars that allows you to get even deeper. That's not doing shit. You're not developing your pecs any better. You're getting way less activation if you just, like I said, cap your stack, lower a little past 90, feel that stretch. As I showed you earlier, you can see tons of people have already felt the difference. It's really easy to connect to. And you should never just ignore your intuition when it comes to your body when you're working out. Like, my muscle means something. When would you want to arch and compress and get a big retraction? If you're a powerlifter, if you need to make something easier, that's all powerlifting is. You're trying to get more things involved. You're trying to spread the force to your connective tissue. You're trying to get anything you can to help. That's why you see this crazy extension. Bodybuilding is the opposite of that. We always want to make things harder. Try to stay pretty flat on the bench. A little bit of arch is okay. And there's varying degrees of it too. I think I have some examples later, but it's like, if you want to get a little bit more arch, you can. That's fine. You can get a little different variations. You just don't lose your intrathoracic pressure, most importantly, by completely squeezing, and just like keep a little tension. That's fine. Just don't throw everything up with no regard for intra-abdominal, intrathoracic pressure. So let's go through some examples of what is good and bad pressing technique. So let's check out this incline press. And so I'm going to start with kind of the arch, the way Dr. Mike or someone would recommend. And you can even just see my pecs. I'm sure I'm not going to get as much protraction as I'm going to whenever I get a better stack. All right, and so now I'm going to try to flatten everything out. I'm going to engage my obliques. And a lot more protraction going. And I just feel way more. Another angle. So again, that's the big arch. And again, I have decent protraction even like this. It's hard for me to not connect to my pecs. But much better, and I just feel way more with this. And when we're on a incline, we can actually, like, since your arms are higher, you can get more depression than like on a flat bench. So one more time, we're extended. And now I'm engaging my obliques. And this is the flye, and it would be the same for like a cable or machine. I have some examples of other people later doing that, so I'm just showing the dumbbell. So this is a big arch, and I'm actually using an orientation pattern to kind of close it down. I see people do this. I also see people just go down really open and not like close and just stay open. Actually, if you orient and close, even though you're compressing, you're still getting a little bit better pecs than if you're just staying flared. Like, I didn't even demonstrate that on here. And then this is the way you'd want to do it. So anytime you're doing a fly, you are going to get some more retraction, but you can see my ribs are excellently rotating, but they're not orienting like crazy. I'm not going there. You don't see my belly pop up. And again, you'll just feel way more tension like right away if you do this correctly. So for flat press, I'm going to just kind of review a video where I'm critiquing Jeff Nippert, who I honestly think is pretty on point with most things besides pressing, like I said, like every other evidence-based influencer there is. But let's check this out.
First, set up your arch for bodybuilding. Create a...
Okay, so don't set up your arch. You should not even think about your arch. Your arch is going to be a consequence of you setting your shoulders into that depressed position. You're only going to arch as much that is necessary. So if we look at the comparison here, you can see he's got really flaring ribs, big arch, a lot of space there. Here, just a minimal arch, only what is necessary. And that's because I want to keep my rib cage volumized. As soon as we throw up that rib cage, we lose stress tension on everything that attaches to it, because we lose the ability to expand on the inhale to volumize from the inside out. And that's what Zach Couples was talking about earlier.
By tucking your shoulder blades in.
You would never want to tuck your shoulder blades in like that. That is absolutely ridiculous. Unless you're powerlifting and you need to create a huge arch, that is not what you want to do. You're going to really take away tension from your pecs. And your shoulders are not any more of a safe position when they're retracted. We need them depressed. I mean, think about all the powerlifters you've ever seen. Have you ever seen a powerlifter that just had like super detailed pecs? Like usually they don't have that good of pecs, even though they bench a crazy amount. They're a lot of triceps. When they're sitting back in that full glenohumeral depression, you're good. They're safe. We don't need the shoulders overly retracted. Just this is going to take away your ability to have the slight protraction that we need to actually get your pecs really involved. So don't do that. Okay, this is what it should look like, right there. And a lot of you guys might not be able to do that. You have to have like a pretty good thoracic rib cage to be able to get that amount of depression. And so if you're super compressed back there, your scapula is not going to posteriorly tip. It's not going to go down your back. And I talk about this a lot on the video I did about how to get 3D delt. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen it, because I cover a lot of posterior expansion techniques that will help fix this. And I have an example of one later, but I have a lot more in that video. That's depression. So that is ideal right there. That's too much. I'm going to close down my ribs. And that's what it'll look like from the back. That is what we want. So this is one of my favorite ways to get posterior expansion, which will make it easier to get that depression of your scapula. And this is Connor Harris, who's great to follow. He's got really good stuff. He dives deep into all this.
So we need to decompress this space. Jacob's going to take a pillow, fold it in half, and wedge it in between his upper hips and his lower ribs. Now, Jacob is going...
And I really like this because the pillow gives you like a little something to push your ribs against to connect to that sensation of them being in that depressed position. Most everybody who's a pretty avid gym goer, they're pretty flared in that rib cage.
Separate the space in between his shoulder blades and spine by trying to reach his elbows away from him a little bit more, but not at the cost of shrugging his shoulders or overly depressing his sternum too much. Now Jacob's going to exhale fully through his mouth, 5 to 10 seconds. He's going to feel his lower ribs come down. He's going to pause, and he's going to inhale silently but fully through his nose, and he's going to feel that space in between the shoulder blades and the spine expand.
I also like to cue a little soft reach with the elbows, kind of the whole time. Maybe a little bit more on the exhale, like a 3 or 4 out of 10, but like a 2 or 3 out of 10 on the inhale. And that's because like what you don't want to have happen is as you inhale, you don't want to have any concentric activity of these back muscles at all. So you got to really make sure these don't pull back. You don't want to get a ton of like activity on the front either, but we just want to make sure that we don't have any kind of pullback on the inhale.
Expand. Do that for 5 to 10 breaths.
Okay, and then let's cover declines. So decline's a lot different than a flat bench or a incline, where the goal is to really depress your scapula, or on a decline press, or if it's like a kind of a decline fly where we're really getting the clavicular fibers involved, we will have some freedom to move, and it's going to be natural, and that's going to be good. You don't have to hit crazy extension or compress your ribcage to do it. So there's a couple ways to actually do this. So this is how I usually do this, and I mean, I love this move. This is one of my favorite moves. I connect to my pecs so good on anything, but especially this. And it's like I could do 3 sets of this and I'll be fucking sore for 3 days. Like I never do a pec workout where I'm not sore. That definitely is the easiest muscle for me to get really sore on. Right here, this is how I normally do it, where I'm got a little bit of engagement in my abs and making sure I have some thoracic pressure. But you can also, there's some benefits to doing this where you orient a little bit. So now I'm letting my rib cage orient up and then orient down. And like I said, your pecs attach to your ribs, so they actually have a role in getting that depression. So from this angle, a little bit of orientation can actually be okay. So this is how I normally do it, but sometimes I do it Now this is how you wouldn't want to do it. This is the example of the bad way. If you orient up, you need to orient back down. And that's pretty good activation. And I know I talk about the ribcage a lot, but it's because it is so influential on everything. If you're compressed, whether it's A to P or whether it's asymmetrically, that's really going to affect the peripheral structures. So if you have a really compressed rib cage, that changes the orientation of your scapula, which means the glenoid fossa is going to be in a little bit different position, meaning you're not going to have full excursion of your shoulder, because that humeral head is not going to have a complete freedom to move. There's going to be some kind of bony blockage because the attachment's been reoriented based off the rib cage position. So rib cage affects so many things in the upper body. Like I said, the pecs attach directly to it. Your lats also attach directly to it. So that's another muscle group that really benefits from working with a volumized rib cage position. All right, so let's look at some examples of bad pressing technique. And we'll start with the worst of the worst, Paul Carter. And so this is just dog shit. I mean, that is A to P compression. He is just up elevated. There's no depression of the scapula. This, he probably doesn't connect to at all. Like, I guarantee you he doesn't feel any pecs on this. Yeah, this is pretty horrible. It's probably why he has to use the elbow wraps as well. I'm sure he's got issues with his elbows, shoulders, everything. Again, because like I talked about, they're in a really fucked up position because his ribcage is so thrown off. He probably doesn't have a lot of options. All right, is it any better light? Maybe he doesn't have to compress as much light. No, still just as shitty. So I would say that's probably the worst technique out of any of the big influencers. And you can tell, no pecs at all. And this is a competition photo. I mean, literally, it looks like he's missing pecs. Like he's had some accident on this left one where it's been removed. So, and this is also just a super compressed look. I'll show you some examples of what it looks like to not be compressed. You're going to have way better separation. You're going to have way better like roundness to your muscle bellies. And a lot of people think this kind of stuff is genetic. It's not. The way you work out really has a huge influence on what your structures and how you appear. You can have a really big fat gut, and it can be in part because your pelvis is descended, so you have like the belly push, your viscera is getting pushed forward. This isn't something you can blame on genetics. You also, whenever you compress and you work out like a powerlifter, you're getting way more like connective tissue involved. There's really no benefit to pressing that way except for being able to produce more force in competition. It's not more force coming from your pecs though, it's coming from everywhere. I mean, honestly, I don't know why anyone follows Paul Carter or listens to him at all. I mean, anyone who's that disconnected from their body, automatically I'm writing off. And like every good take he gets from somebody else. All right, next we have good old Dr. Mike. And he does a little different technique than Paul Carter. It's still shit, but maybe less shit slightly. And you can see he kind of does this thing where he puffs his chest up and then he kind of brings it back down, thinking that that's getting a better stretch, but it's not. He's got those floating scapula. He's so compressed. He's not getting good tension. You can't see any protraction. And it's like when you move away as you press, you're not getting more tension. You're not getting a better stretch. You need to keep that volumized as you're pressing. You're losing tension if you do that. It's kind of like, so at my gym, we have a hyperextension, like a normal 45-degree hyper, and it's kind of low. So if I have someone holding a weight, they can't lengthen their arms all the way. They got to kind of like bend it just slightly. And as they're going over, if they come up and they lengthen their arms as they're coming up, they lose tension. They're moving away as those arms are going forward. If they keep it fixed, then they get tension constantly. But if that's the same concept, just kind of moving away from the weight, you're not creating more tension. You're moving in space as the weight's coming up. So you're actually taking off a lot of tension. This huge rib cage flare, yeah, not very ideal. And it's crazy that he gives advice on technique. That's like one of the main things he does. Him giving advice on biomechanics is like me giving advice on how to avoid mentally unstable chicks. I mean, I just love crazy bitches. I can't help it. Yeah, this is awful. And here we see him on the incline, super arched. He probably loves this bench that helps him get even more arched. And that is what I demonstrated earlier. It's like you can get more depression to get a stretch from an incline than you can on flat. So you want to pull down. Don't arch to create that, though. Yeah. Just ugly. And also, like, use some fucking weight. Push yourself, dude. Jesus. So let's look at Dr. Mike. I've obviously critiqued his physique in other videos, like after his show. So here we go. Not a lot happening, even at this lean body weight. Not super thick, no definition. And here, even with like the most goon lighting, him being super lean, not a single striation to be found at all. And again, this is somebody who takes copious amounts of gear. Here is Eugene Teo, who I'm a big fan of. Just like Jeff Nippert, I think he's on point with most things, just not how to press. But I do think he's a little bit better than Mike. And some people just connect to protraction a little bit better, even if they are kind of using compression. I feel like he does better protraction without as much orientation of the rib cage, but it's still way too flared and it's still way too compressed. Again, he's fighting for range of motion. So Eugene, you know, I know he's natty, but doesn't have the most developed pecs of all time. Even when he was like pretty jacked, they weren't like that good. Like, look at this. We've got really good shoulders, good arms, but again, not a single detail in pecs. And this is something I see all the time. Anyone who presses with this kind of compression, that flared rib cage, those completely retracted shoulder blades, I see no details, no striations. And I wonder if he's like covering up his pecs on purpose because he knows they're not that great. So let's look at some more presses. And again, that you should never see that kind of flare. That is something that would really never be a good thing in any movement. Unless you're just at absolute failure and you got to get it up so you don't get crushed. All right, so let's check out one more example. We'll look at good old Milo, who, man, I don't even know what this is. This is pretty much on point with Paul as far as being just as bad. It's just a different kind of bad. Crazy extended rib cage again. Like, just shoulders are so squeezed together. No protraction. I mean, the elbow position, all that's pretty weird. And I've never seen someone do a side chest with so little side chest. Hamstring actually looks pretty good here, big guy. But yeah, I'm not a fan of these pecs, and I wouldn't expect you to have any pecs when all you do is weird lengthened range partials and super weird things that require like very light load. So let's look at some examples of good pressing technique in people with good pecs. So I talked about this guy before. I just saw him randomly and I was like blown away with the level of detail and just how full his pecs were. And this is what I mean by like having a not compressed look. This is somebody who does not, I can just, before I even saw any of his vids, I was like, oh, this guy's going to work out the way I like. He's not going to squeeze everything and try to fight for some crazy range of motion. And sure enough, when I looked at his videos, we work out our pecs exactly the same. I mean, look at that. That is fucking crazy. So here's a couple clips of him doing his pec day. And, oh, look, we're not really going past 90. And all you guys want to shit on my buddy Joel Seaman, he's right. Pretty much. And so, yeah, this is really good tension. You can see the protraction going. We don't see a crazy rib flare. These look good. There's a reason this guy's pecs look the way they do, and everyone else that I showed before really didn't have that kind of definition and definitely didn't have that kind of roundness. And again, look at the kind of protraction he gets. Look at the range. Again, Dr. Mike would make a video shitting on this while this guy's pecs are on a whole nother world than Dr. Mike's. But look at that protraction. Look at that rib cage. That's how you develop pecs. You can just visually see it. And I guarantee you, he's like me. He feels every single fiber when he's doing this. He probably gets super sore the same way I do. Pecs should be the easiest muscle group to get sore. And on this, we have a close grip press. Same thing. Nothing crazy with the range of motion, but look at all that tension on the pecs. Could he go deeper? Yeah, but it's going to lose tension on the pecs. I mean, that's crazy. You can just see how good they fire. A lot different looking than when we saw Paul Carter doing a similar move. And here we have a cable fly. And Milo would be really critical of this, saying you're not going nearly deep enough. You'll get better development, but I would not take that dude's word over this guy. Again, we're going to perfectly acceptable range of motion with that ribcage intact. That looks awesome. And here we have some of these kind of decline flies. And like I said, anytime you do a decline motion where you get the clavicular fibers more involved, you will have just more shoulder girdle movement. You don't try to like tack them down, let them move up, and then depress them down. Because again, your pecs, they have a role in getting that orientation of your sternum back down. Now, one thing I really love that I saw this guy do that I incorporate myself and that I have all my clients do is he was doing like one-armed on alternating dumbbell presses. And I love doing this for shoulders and for pecs and for back too. And it is so beneficial because especially when you're not going like max effort, you're getting expansion on one side as you're getting compression on the other. So you're not getting that complete anterior to posterior compression. So you're able to keep a lot better tension on the muscle than if you were to go together. Now, when you go real heavy, you might not get expansion on one side, but you're still not going to get nearly the amount of compression. So again, you'll still connect better to it. Yeah, these look awesome. And again, people really should be doing these kind of things. I don't see bodybuilders do this at all. I was so happy when I saw him do this. We literally do all the same shit. And here's an example of how you can do this pretty heavy. I'm doing this for shoulders. Those are some 120s. And I always like doing this stuff because it looks super impressive in the gym. But I mean, going alternating is not that hard whenever you connect to it. It actually is a little easier than doing them together. And so I really like doing the alternating presses because, like I said, you're going to limit the compression force. You're going to keep better tension on the muscle. Man, I don't know if I could do that again. That was like 6 months ago. I hit that and I was like, okay, goal accomplished. I don't think I want to try that ever again. And if we see him on a flat press, again, stopping about 90 degrees, letting his pecs do the work. So check this out. I know I showed him earlier, but this is just fucking crazy. This guy's a physique competitor. I would love to see him like put on a little bit more muscle and jump into the classic. Super freaky. Jesus Christ. What the fuck am I looking at? He knows it. Those are wild. Another example of somebody who knows how to press is my man Ken Jackson, who I did a podcast with. And bodybuilders get this right way more often than evidence-based nerds who supposedly know everything. And they shit on bodybuilders when they're actually doing it better. I used to hear Jay Cutler talk about how you shouldn't arch your back, stay completely flat as you can on a bench press. You know, he wasn't being super technical. He wasn't talking about ribcage and why that influences everything. He just felt it more and intuitively knew it was better. People should stop writing off bodybuilders for their intuition because almost always there's some biomechanical reasoning behind it. They don't understand, but they can connect good enough to feel it. All right, so my man doing a 4-plate press and beautiful range of motion. Rib cage is down. You see the protraction. Notice how he's not moving like Mike was, puffing his chest and moving back. Again, here we have a chest press machine. Super good protraction. Look, we're not hitting a crazy deep range of motion. And again, this is just a look that is not compressed. You will not look like this if you are arching your back and squeezing shoulder together on every single press. Look at the fullness. He's really going to do some damage in 212 in the next year, I think. And then let's look at one more example from somebody. Here's my former coach, Robin Strand, who gets super shredded. Look at the details he's got in his pec fibers. And he is somebody who, we actually did a podcast together. He talked about how he changed the way he trains his chest. And after having a lot of injuries and working with his new kind of movement coach, he really focused on the ribs a lot. That was really cool to hear him talk about because not a lot of bodybuilders ever talk about ribs. And so let's look at Robin. All right, this kind of pec press fly thing and perfect tension, ribs under control, not excessive range of motion. And here we go, same thing, ribs under control on this press, on like a little bit of like a slight decline angle. And on this, it'd be really easy to just completely lose everything, but he's still keeping it really engaged and he's still moving in a relative motion manner and getting really good protraction. And then I guess I'll show a couple examples of myself because I know I'm not the best bodybuilder in the world, but I've got some good pecs. All right, so here I am doing just the flat Atlantis press, and look, I'm not arching my back, I'm not flaring my ribs. I'm just really connecting to tension on my pecs. Range of motion, a little bit beyond 90. I love this machine. And look, I'm doing lengthened partials. And I was doing this before I ever got involved with social media and knew that that was a thing. I didn't need a study to tell me that was a good thing. I just like it. And I don't need a study to tell me not to do it either, which I know one just came out and everyone's losing the shit. Poor Milo, his whole world's probably falling apart. But I'm still going to do it because I still like it and it feels good. I don't base a single fucking thing I ever do on any kind of evidence-based study. All right, we're getting heavy. Still got good rib cage position. Good protraction. Again, when that rib cage flares, you're going to miss out on a lot of protraction. This is a really cool machine if you guys never use it. The Rogers pendulum chest shoulder press. And again, small range of motion from this angle, this heavy. Look at all the pecs firing. And I'm sure legions of Mike's fans would see that and run to critique me. And they all look like shit. Pretty kind of similar angle here. You just can see a little bit different. Making this a pec move. And I'm not squeezing, I'm pushing down my shoulder blades. You want them to posteriorly tip to depress against your back. And on this clip, this is a good example of how any system that's brought close to its threshold becomes more rigid. It just reduces the degrees of freedom. And this is true for any system of your body. And so here I am, I'm doing a double with 365. In the first rep, I'm able to really keep my stack and keep some relative motion and not just orient. But my second rep, I'm gonna get crushed if I don't, so I have to a little bit. And name drop, look who is spotting me. That is my man, Alex Hormozy. So really good stack. I was like, oh, that was easy. I'll try one more. And now I'm starting to arch. You can see my rib cage go up. I had to make it easier. I had to take tension away from just the pecs to get it up. And that's why you want to do that. If you're a powerlifter, you will be able to move more weight. But I felt less on my pecs the second rep than I did the first. I'm a pretty good example of what someone looks like when they're not compressed. Full pecs, separation, detail. Like once you develop an eye for it, it's like really easy to see. I mean, you can just look at a powerlifter versus a bodybuilder typically. Never gonna get that level of detail in your pecs if you press the way that all these evidence-based guys are telling you to. And I know I'm enhanced, so like people might take everything I say with a grain of salt. I don't have a ton of pictures from when I was natty, but I looked really good. People thought I was on juice all the time. This is me when I was 18 in college. I didn't start any gear till I was 23. And so still had a little bit of the serrated inner pec fibers, thickness, even though I was only like a $160 here. And this is a little blurry, but you can still see. And then I actually went on a 4.5 month bulk. It was the first time in my life I didn't have to work. It's the only time in my life I didn't have to work. My first semester of college. And I just ate fucking everything I could eat. Whatever I ate a pizza on top of it. That was my meal plan. And I gained 40 pounds. And this was me at the end of the 4.5 months. A little bit of body fat gain, but man, I was full and I was thick and I was tight. And everybody thought I was on gear, and I had never touched it at this point. I'd never done any pro hormone or anything. I was about 194 here, so I gained about 35 pounds in those 4.5 months. Now, there is something else to consider. I do see some people use a little bit different style. It's not what I like necessarily, but it definitely works. And here we see Bald Omni-Man, who has some of the best pecs out of any of these natural guys. I think he's natty. I think that's the thing. And I think he probably has the best pecs out of everybody then. And I wanted to see how he pressed because I was curious, because he kind of looks extended and like compressed in some ways, but usually don't get those full pecs if you're compressed. All right, so when you see him press, look at the amount of protraction he throws up. He does totally retract his shoulder blades, it looks like, but he like bounces out of the bottom real quick with protraction. And that is a technique I've seen bodybuilders use really effectively, and I think it actually really helps bring out details. Like, he's got a lot of details in his pecs for a natty. I mean, look at that level of protraction. And somebody else who does that is Andrew Jacked. Look at that same thing. He's getting completely squeezed, but then he's protracting out of that bottom pretty fastly. And Andrew Jacked has some crazy fucking detailed pecs. Same style as Bald Omni-Man. So I think that's effective. I just don't do it myself, but obviously it can work. So let's review, because really it's pretty simple. If I'm doing a flat press or an incline press, I want to get as much depression as I can most of the time. There's nothing wrong with pressing from here and doing things just to get a little bit of different feel, get a little different fiber recruitment, but you're going to get way more bang for your buck in general if you get as much depression as you can. You need to be able to activate your low lats and your low traps to do that, and make sure your rib cage doesn't excessively flare. You know, if you need to a little bit as you're getting close to failure, that's okay, but don't let it get crazy. Again, on an incline, you can get even more depression. That doesn't mean you want more arch at all. You'll just be able to get more posterior tipping of your shoulder blades just because your arm's a little bit higher. On flies, make sure to keep some integrity in that stack. Okay, don't immediately flare. And then on a decline kind of thing, just think about keeping some abdominal pressure, but let everything move. Okay, you don't want it to immediately go. Like anytime you're doing a press, like that's really what I look at first. As soon as you lower, how soon before your rib cage starts to flare? Some people it's right away. Your goal is to keep it. I'll tell you, as you get to the bottom, it's going to go a little bit. That's normal. You want them to excellently rotate. You're not trying to use all your abs and keep everything crunched in. You really don't want to orient that way. You want to keep them down more with like your obliques, but they're going to move. Your goal isn't to keep them from moving. It's just to keep them from moving excessively. So on a decline, you can kind of just get that nice control, or you can kind of orient and then orient back down and let that whole shoulder girdle move. A lot of times I'll do both within a set. I might start pretty strict, and then I'll get a little bit of that orientation, because again, your pecs are having a role in that orientation, closing it down. So that's good. All right, so I hope that this was helpful for some of you guys. If you have any questions or comments, just put it below, and I always try to do my best to respond. And let me know which body part you would like me to cover next, okay? All right, appreciate it, guys.